What's up, you guys? Today we're going to go over the general settings page. The general settings page has a bunch of complicated looking options. So in this video, we will uncomplicate them. Let's get started. Please smash that like button and subscribe. So if I go options, I can open up general settings here. First thing we're going to notice is our main GUI scaling. Main GUI scaling is going to be the main scaling for things within FL Studio. This can actually help change the size of some plugins as well. Pop-up scaling and toolbars is going to scale the different options within FL Studio at their own rate or size, unless you leave them on main. Main, well, is this up here, the main GUI scaling. So whatever you choose here, these will reference and base themselves off of as well. To the right, our PPI is actually for calibration for touchscreens and things like that. So you most of the time will really need to change this at all. This question mark here will actually take you to the FL Studio manual, which will tell you a bunch of the stuff I'm about to tell you right now. Thick lines will not be an available option until you are scaling over 200%. And this is a purely aesthetic option. Scaling over 200% for me on this screen would be a tad bit ridiculous, so I'm unsure of what it looks like, although I would assume that it just thickens lines. High visibility will do random things and change stuff within the FL Studio interface in different ways to try and help people with vision and color issues. So if you have problems with eyesight, check that. Check out the things that it does. Now, transparent menus, I'm not entirely sure what exactly this one applies to, but transparent windows, if you'll see, if you look closely, we can see these knobs and things behind this window. We can go off and you will no longer be able to see that. We can also go on and there it is again. Transparent menus, however, is the same exact thing, but for menus, I don't believe it's for drop downs like this, but I don't know what FL Studio considers a menu versus a drop down. Animations, this is going to be for like things related to your mouse or controls or pop-ups, anything like that. This actually doesn't affect your CPU usage in a negative fashion if you were to turn this up and have more graphics. ImageLine actually says at times that having more animations can actually mean less CPU. Not entirely sure how that works, but that's directly from them. So next we have smoothing and ultra smooth. From my understanding, these relate directly to frame rate. I'm not entirely sure what the relation is exactly, but the more frames per second, the smoother the image, the less frames per second, the rougher the image. And so you can play with this if things are looking rough within FL Studio, or if it's really smooth, but you're trying to save a little bit of CPU, you can probably turn the frames per second down. That way, less images are being processed by the graphics interface per second. Force refreshes actually is a workaround / troubleshoot button for Windows Desktop Manager, which is a background program that runs on Windows, which is used for handling graphics. So having this on is pretty good. If you right click it, you'll notice a Surface Pro Hack option. Don't click this unless you know what you're doing. It has to do with the way that Windows draws or refreshes FL Studio windows, which, if turned on, can cause issues. Language, of course, is language. Note names, this will change the note names in the piano roll. So you have C, D, E, F, G, B, A. Germanic is C, D, E, F, G, A, H, where H is a flat B. Neo-Latin or solfege, or however that's said, is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which you may recognize if you've ever taken some singing classes. Going down the left before we go down the right, we have optimize for, which will just be for like a mouse, pencil, or if we're doing touch screen for our monitor. We have click and hold special gesture functions. This is actually going to give us options in the piano roll. There's a list of these functions that I will include in the description down below. This includes things like If you hold a note, it'll copy the note, the ability to hold a note and scroll your scroll wheel to change velocity and other things. Use both mouse buttons in Step Sequencer. If you have this on, left click place, right click delete, which you're probably used to. If it's off, left click places and deletes notes in the Step Sequencer. Next, we have associate project files with application. If this is on, then any FLP or other related files, when double clicked, will automatically open FL Studio. If you have multiple versions of FL Studio on your system, then you'll want to have this unchecked in the one you don't want to use and checked in the one you do want to use. And if setting this here doesn't work, you can do it in your operating system by going to one of these said files, right clicking, going properties, and changing the opens with section to the FL Studio version that you want it to open with. Now, before we get into these long lists here, for anybody who might be here for the smaller sections, we will jump to undo history. Undo history sets the maximum level of undos that you will see over here in the browser. Under current project, history, in here there should be about 100 undos before it starts deleting the last one in the list. Undo knob tweaks enables or disables the function to undo all automatable, if that's even a word, all knobs or sliders that you have the ability to automate. Alternate undo mode. So what this does is how when we click Control Z, it undoes something, but if we click Control Z again, it redoes that. This actually turns that off, and it gives you the classic ability to Control Z multiple times to continue to undo. We have automatically check for updates, pretty self-explanatory, and warnings. Now, what this is when we do things like, for example, delete this, and I get this warning option here. I can click don't show this in the future and I'll never see it again, but I can actually check it and turn it on here, and then it'll turn it back on. So if there is something where, like, for example, deleting a channel in the channel rack, you want that extra step so you don't accidentally mess something up in your project, but that is gone. You can fix that here, or you can turn off the options here, and you can just browse through and look at the different things to see what they are if you're interested. Next, we have project data size warning. This actually sets the max size that an FL Studio project will save before it starts warning you about the size of your project. Next, we have auto name channels. It's pretty self-explanatory in the top left. Channel name will be set to the sample or preset file name. So if I drag a sample in here, it'll open as the name of that sample. I open Minisynth, it's open as Minisynth. If I was to drag in a preset, it would be named what the preset is. You have auto name effect slots, which does the same exact thing as here, but in your mixer. We've got auto zip empty channels. This actually makes it so that anything that is not in use will scrunch down in size. So if I click that on, and then we add some things here, I'll switch, come back, we can see that is zipped. I have to right click it to open it. We have auto select linked modules. What this will do is when we select a channel here, it'll actually show and highlight and select the channel that is associated to that in the mixer. So mixer 4 highlights mixer 4. For instrument plugins, this also shuts off the ability to open multiple channels at the same time. When that is off, you can open as many of these as you would like. However, it will not highlight the mixer track there in the background. If you want the best of both worlds, if I have this open and I want to open Minisynth, for example, you can select it here in the channel rack and then click it. And now we have both of these open. Just to show we can open both of these. It's that simple if we have auto select linked modules off. Auto zoom in piano roll is going to automatically zoom to a depth that it thinks is good within the piano roll for whatever is in that piano roll. So if I'm zoomed way out like this and I exit and I reopen that piano roll, see how it automatically zoomed back in to something that is closer and easier to work with. small scroll bars in editors, that is actually going to change the size of the scroll bars in the piano roll and in the playlist. So you'll see a small size difference here when I reopen this each way. We've got detach all plugins. So detaching all plugins makes all plugins detached from FL Studio. What this means that you can actually drag your plugin to another screen if you have dual monitors, and your plugins are just kind of treated as their own standalone programs rather than treated as something within FL Studio. The issue with this can be is that detached plugins can steal the audio driver from FL Studio. To fix this, go Audio and make sure this auto close option is off. Auto close makes it so that when FL Studio is not in focus, like you have your internet open or something, FL Studio auto closes out from the audio driver, and the audio driver can then be taken by those other applications. A detached plugin in FL Studio will act like it's your internet browser, for example, and will take that focus and take that audio driver from FL Studio, which if you're working in an FL Studio project, you can see how that might be an issue. If your audio driver is multi-channel though, that is something you may not have to worry about. Next, we have alternate meter scale. I want you to notice how down here, these are really close and tight together. 15 to 12 is kind of tight. 15 to 18 is really tight. 18 to 21 is tighter. Yet here, just a 3 dB change is huge. This is more of a logarithmic view, where if I change this, you're going to see we get this sort of static view here where all the spacing is even. We have show startup splash screen, which is the little logo every time it opens up with the FL Studio version. Next, we have restore previous state after solo, which is actually pretty cool. If I turn that on, let's say I have these random ones like that. If I was to solo this track, okay, now that that track is soloed, I can unsolo it, and look at that. These all went back to being exactly how they were. So if you are throwing ideas on the board and seeing what sticks, and you have a bunch of unused channels and instruments and recordings that are sitting in the playlist to be arranged and played with, this is a great option, because if you mute them, you can keep them, well, muted and how they were prior to any type of soloing or anything like that. Now, if you do have this on and you want to just reset everything anyways, for example, unmute all of this, I can hold Control and I can just mute and unmute, and then Control reset all of it. Back to general settings, we have hide plugin window toolbar by default. So if I go to a plugin here, this cogwheel is going to have different options. And what it's saying is that this cogwheel will be off by default. Now, that is up until your plugin state is saved with this open. And that actually happens pretty dang easily because, well, most of these, how the heck did that happen? Most of these will have this auto save here going on that is going to, well, auto save everything you've got set here for the most part. Some things aren't included. If you want to learn more about that kind of stuff, I have an in-depth on effects VST wrappers, as well as an in-depth on your sampler and all the settings here. Both those videos above. Next, we have silent startup. Silent startup actually is about that little beep that you have at the beginning, that little sound, that marketing sound that FL Studio does with its little image every time you start up. So if you check that, that'll go away. Then we've got default template, which is the default template that FL Studio opens to when you open it. You can choose from all of the regular ones here, as well as any you've made. If you're interested in potentially checking out or downloading any of these templates or learning how to make your own, I'll provide those above, and that's so many of them, maybe just down in the description. I will leave that at my piano practice template. And underneath here is startup project. In order to use our default template, every time we load up, it has to start up project on the default template. You can also set this to empty project or last used project, where it'll open the last thing you were using. Next, you have don't limit windows to screen. This allows you to drag windows outside of the screen, and if you lose a plugin outside the screen, just check this again, or uncheck it, I guess you'd be doing, and that plugin will pop back into the screen. Fast sample preview. If this is on, when you're here in the browser and you click different samples, you'll get a preview. Fast sample preview makes it so that FL Studio doesn't wait until the sample has completely loaded in order to start playing it for you. So it's pretty much processing it live as you're listening to it. Auto keep long audio on disk automatically sets audio that fits a specific criteria to load directly from the hard disk. So this would be anything that's a 16-bit wave or a 32-bit wave, cannot be a 24-bit wave. And this would happen for long or large audio files. If we go into my sampler here, for example, you will see a keep on disk option. This is actually the same exact thing. And this is what that setting is alluding to. And when this keep on disk option is on, these pre-computed effects over here will actually no longer work on your sample. However, keep on disk is supposed to be a great way to free up memory up here for your project, because it keeps it off of your RAM and straight from the hard disk. Read sample tempo information is actually going to allow or tell FL Studio to read tempo info off of samples, which can be used by FL Studio in many different ways. In order for it to read that tempo information has to actually be saved into the metadata of the file. And FL Studio will use this in different ways for like stretching, things like that. Don't initialize controls automatically is for automatable or knobs or sliders that can be automated. What initialization is an initial value or where you want FL Studio to place a knob at the very beginning of a song. So this panning here, if I click init song with this position, it creates an initial position. If I pan it left and play the song, you'll see as soon as I click play, this jumps back straight. If I go to general settings, I can check don't initialize controls automatically, which will stop that from happening when we create automation. If I right click this, you'll see there's no initial value. If I move it to the right, create automation clip, and come back to it, you'll see now we have an initial value with this position. And I never set that. That's set automatically because I created an automation clip. So in order to stop that from happening automatically, don't initialize controls automatically. We have force high performance power plan. A lot of CPUs have clock speed throttling and just things to stop your CPU from working too hard or overworking, especially for the power plan that is chosen. So if you're in like power saver mode and any other mode that isn't a high performance mode, clicking this will force your laptop or your computer into that high performance mode, allowing more CPU for use within FL Studio. Next, we have cursor scaling. Changing this will change our mouse size. Then we have legacy scaling, which is for use with native plugins only. What legacy scaling is going to do is it's going to take those native plugins and those older ones and scale them for larger and higher resolutions, because as technology has advanced, so has resolution size. And then we have use offline help, which sticks to the offline version of the user manual. However, to stay more up to date, I would suggest keeping it online. And that just about covers it. There was enough there that going over everything in a summary would be kind of a lot. Timestamps below. But in general, we're talking about graphics and different interface options to decide the way that the inner workings of FL Studio work. I hope this video is helpful. If you liked this video, please like the video. If you have any comments, please comment. I always appreciate a subscribe. It's Warren with Scale Audio, and adios.